I love Metroidvanias. As someone who has played the GBA Metroid since he was a kid, to slowly escalate to the guy whose two brain cells lost it with the announcement and release of Metroid Dread, I've enjoyed these types of games for quite a while now. In recent years, I've been playing the Igavania titles and knocking out some of the big indie games. Some I've enjoyed more than others, a story for another time. One of these days, when I was once again craving a Metroidvania and decided it wasn't time for my 15th playthrough of Metroid Dread, I saw a title that was dirt cheap on my Steam wishlist, Gato Roboto. I've had it on my wishlist for a while, haven't heard good things about it, even wasn't a step forward Metroidvania design. So it was a case of, why not? The graphics resemble a Game Boy title with a black and white color scheme. I suppose comparable to Metroid 2 on Game Boy. Its monochromatic color scheme isn't something that should affect your exploration. Maybe one or two times you might miss something, but if it's a door to another room, the map will clearly note that it's a passage. And compared to Metroid 2, it is much more animated and fluid. The art style itself is very cute. Aside from the concept that you're playing the game as a small cat, all the enemies are adorable. And some of these guys I just straight up don't want to kill. But you know, they shot first, and I respond appropriately. Kinda reminds me of a Kirby game, think about it, but without disturbing final bosses. The music is mostly calm techno, but overall I describe it more as distant. Fitting for the space setting, I guess. And boss fights and enemy encounters do have more intense music. It's good stuff, I would say. It's definitely fitting for whatever's happening on screen. In the reaches of the cosmos, a spacenaut named Gary receives a distress call from an abandoned base and goes to check it out. When arriving at the planet, his cat Kiki steps on the keyboard and makes them both crash into the planet. The ensuing crash leaves Gary entrapped inside the ship, but Kiki manages to get out, and so she proceeds to explore the depths of the planet, hoping to find a way to save her owner. You are told to go find a mech, since in cat form, Kiki is basically naked. You can jump and climb walls by pressing the jump button while sticking onto a wall. You can also swim, but you also have one hit point, which makes it pretty tense whenever you're forced to complete a section with only the cat. After walking for a bit, you find a save station that gives you the mech. With it becomes much more standard Metroid affair. You can shoot in 4 directions and jump. You also have a health bar which you can expand with health kits, basically energy tanks from Metroid. The mech is also vulnerable to water, which I guess fries its circuits. You can exit the mech at any time, which is required if the passage is too small for the Gundam. So getting out of the suit is, in a way, this game's morph ball. Well, it's much more like the robot from Action Verge, think about it. Since you can get out of the mech, you can take it anywhere. But you are given another mech at save points, which also double as recharge stations, and they will be the only way you can heal, since enemies don't drop resources of any kind. Save stations are frequent, so I doubt you'll be starting for heals, but it does feel a bit like other ammo.
The baby.
You proceed to explore with your newly acquired weapon of mass destruction and find missiles, which I think the game handles in a very interesting way. Missiles are unlimited in a way, since they have a cooldown, probably to circumvent the fact that enemies don't drop ammo. You can only fire 2 missiles in quick succession, but you can later find an upgrade to fire more without waiting. They can also influence your jump, making you go a little higher and longer. but it isn't like a double jump. It will only affect your trajectory slightly. And they have a blast radius, so it doesn't use a stronger beam with a cooldown. They can be used to harm enemies, even if there is a block between them and the sweet embrace of granted, they're close enough, of course. It's a good way to deal with enemies if they're a bit dangerous to tackle head on. You come across a mouse that proceeds to attack you, leading to the first boss fight. Ha! Who's on the end of the mouse trap now, you bitch? It serves as the first boss, which makes use of the recently acquired missiles. Since you can only shoot 2 at a time, you're supposed to be careful with them, as regular shots do way less damage. The bosses of this game did give me quite a bit of trouble during my first playthrough, even a little bit in my most recent playthrough. After you defeat it, it seems like the rat can talk like any other person, but for the moment you don't pay it any mind. For now. You can then access the hub area of sorts. I think it's called the Nexus. Here you can access all the areas that you will be exploring. I should mention that the map isn't very detailed. It won't mark certain places like a rebel's room, neither will it mark items you collected. The game is small enough that it isn't a big issue, but this is something even GBA Metroids did in 2002. As a computer tells you, the whole station is upside down. One area is underwater, another one is burning, and the ventilation isn't working. The computer serves as the boss statues that will lead you to the Turian in Super Metroid, to then access the last area, the lab. The order you do these tasks in is linear, so first you have to travel to the aqueducts. This area is probably the one out of 3 that have the best balance of cat and mech action, since the others lean on one or the other. But even then, there's a bit more cat than mech. I think they made it that way since the mech is pretty standard Metroid gameplay, so they focus more on the most unique aspect gameplay-wise of the game, cat. Since the mech can't go underwater, you're sometimes forced into traversing water with just a cat, but you're also sometimes given a submarine. It can only shoot regular attacks, but it also has auto fire, and when using it, you can more easily maneuver around bullets and enemies. You will eventually stumble upon the rat again, or is it a different rat? I don't remember. You get the first and only underwater boss fight. You occasionally have to shoot down its projectiles unless you want the gold. You defeat it eventually. In a few rooms after, you find the spin module. It's a double jump that also damages enemies, but it isn't like Sam's screw attack. It does way less damage. Probably using platforming. See, if you spin jump into an enemy, you can then spin jump again. So the low damage was decided to design rooms where you have to chain a bunch of spin jumps. This gets thrown out the window by the end game, but hey, one step at a time. Now having the spin module, you can continue fixing the aqueducts, which checks off one of the boxes. Now it's time to go to Florida. The furnace is an area so hot that Kiki can't get out of her mech, so this is a mech only area. I might have brought this up, but the mech gameplay is much more focused in combat compared to others, probably because the cat sections are mostly just platforming. Combat is optional, and you don't really have to fight enemies unless the frogs really piss you off, in that case. But you are forced frequently into rooms that lock you into fighting them to open the door. Reminds me a bit of Other M, go back to that comparison. The combat is competent enough to not make these rooms drag or feel tedious, and obviously the more upgrades you get, the more interesting it gets. But some enemies feel really spongy fighting them with your basic pea shooter, which you don't upgrade for probably the first half of the game. And the missiles might be unlimited, but you also can't spam them. That sometimes gives the combat a bit of strategy, like do I shoot a missile and risk it, or do I spit at the enemy? But it's mostly in bosses. The combat overall is enjoyable, but if you want a Metroidvania with grid combat, I could give you better options. So you need to cool down the area, which implies destroying 2 furnaces and heater tubes. Before doing the latter, you have to fight another rat, which I'm sure is the same as the first encounter. What follows is, in my opinion, one of the best fights. You need to evade attacks that come from below, and midway through, the lava on the floor will disappear and the fight changes entirely. Also puts to the test your newly acquired dash. You can use it to pass through obstacles and also speed up your traversal. This makes Gato Roboto into a much more fast-paced game, or at least I feel like it. Spin jumping and dashing into enemies becomes really fun, and it makes combat a lot more interesting. Too bad next area is only cat though. After destroying the supply of Gatorade, you also get a cooler, which means you can now shoot 3 missiles at a time instead of 2. With 1 task left, you now only need to squeeze into the vents. This area might be the hardest since you're basically made out of glass. You have to avoid various enemies and hazards. That sometimes makes the fact that enemies respawn if you leave and enter a room a little annoying. It's easily the part where I remember dying the most, especially during my first playthrough. And even though this area is one with the least mech gameplay, This is where you get the only damage upgrade to your shot, which will now obliterate enemies if you have auto fire. This area introduces a cannon that you have to charge, so that you can break stones without the mech. There's also a boss that you have to fight with only the cat, and you have to damage it with these cannons by destroying the shield. And since you destroy it part by part and it spins, you can sometimes damage it without removing the entire shield. I remember this being one of the hardest fights during my first playthrough. I mean, it's still one of the tougher bosses, but it isn't that hard my second run. So, I think I should talk about the trinkets you find along the way. Yeah, no, very abrupt. The game's collectibles consist of 2 items, plus computer terminals that explain some lore, but I'll discuss them when I talk about the ending. One of these collectibles are the health upgrades. Pretty self-explanatory. You collect one, you can take 1 more point of damage. Of those, there are 15. The other collectibles are cartridges that change the game's color palette. This is why some footage is of a different color. I recommend doing this once in a while to avoid monotony with the game's visuals. Heck, I didn't even use every palette in this run. But they also serve another purpose. There is this one NPC called Reba, this cute little frog mechanic that will help you upgrade if you collect cartridges. If you bring half of them, she will give you the repeater. Basically, it's auto fire. And if you collect them all, you get the hopper module. This is pretty much your space jump, in a sort of twisted way. You can jump infinitely by spin jumping and using your dash, because it's upgrade mixes so you reset your double jump each time you dash in the air. It's a cool reward for collecting all cartridges, but to get it, you have to at least get to the incubator, the penultimate area of the game. And it only has 1 upgrade that you are required to have the hopper module. It's very underutilized, and a bit disappointing. But the game is so brief I don't have time to be disappointed. So we did all the tasks and now the computer should let you in, but you need a password. Right before Gary can decode the password, his signal is cut off. Backtracking to your ship gives you the MacGuffin you need, but also a message of your own talking about how Kiki is a great soldier. It's pretty wholesome.
Okay. Yeah, good. Okay, yeah. No, in here. You activate. Up in. Go in. Go in. Go up in here. Here, up you.
With a decoder in hand, you enter the incubator, a strange place where they seem to breed all the enemies you faced, which is a bit disturbing for this game. More on that in a second, but it's really bare with upgrades, so you don't spend much time exploring. Let's take a moment to catch up with the story. Throughout the game, you find the aforementioned computer terminals with logs of the lab. You see a scientist working there that has a dog with a terminal illness, and he's planning to transfer his consciousness to another animal. But there are also some guards talking about how the dog has gone mad, has stolen some money for his research, and he also doesn't seem like he has his thoughts straight, or was a totally good person to begin with. So you can tell the dude has a few loose screws up there. Once you reach the laboratory, there are 2 upgrades and it's a straight shot to the final boss. In the fight, it's revealed that the rat you've been fighting was actually the scientist from the logs. He had been planning to transfer his and his dog's consciousness to other bodies, and found Gary and Kitty to be perfect vessels. So he sent a signal to lure them in since Gary's patrol route was around the area. What? What's a bit more interesting is that when he asks himself what motivation he has, he just says, I don't remember. Damn, bro. Then he switches minds and now is in control of Gary's body, starting the final boss fight. He jumps around, making it a bit hard to aim the missile shots. He then switches to jumping near the ground, so you have to dash through. He drags himself with sauce on the ground and tries to crush you. It's easily the best boss fight in the game. The second fight where he battles you without a mech, and he's taller than the cat in the Gundam for some reason. The fight isn't as good as the last one, but it's a nice change of pace compared to the other giant robot fights. Similar to how the SAX stood out in Metroid Fusion, but the fight is also very brief, where the mech breaks down and you're about to be body swapped. But the dog suddenly breaks out of the tube and rebels against the dog. The game ends with you and the dog escaping on the spaceship. Pity about the terminal cancer though. Oh, and what about Reba? And that's the game. I did a 100% run and it was fairly enjoyable and brief. But that's only if you have the hindsight. This game doesn't have many upgrades, so most areas don't require second visits. You can theoretically collect every upgrade first time through, except the one that needs the hopper module. Overall, I really enjoyed this game, but I don't think myself playing it anytime soon. But considering the price, especially on sale, it's a fun little Metroidvania that I think is even a bit underrated. But it also doesn't do anything outstandingly like top dog Metroidvanias. But not every game that you play has to be contender for Game of the Year, so I recommend it. If you're looking for a cheap game that still has a heart of Metroid in it, then give it a shot. That's everything I have for today, so farewell, traveler. May we meet again in another place and time.